moment. It's a bit.
Can you hear me? Yes, yes, excellent. So yeah, good afternoon. Thanks very much for joining us for this discussion on content discovery. I'm now going to have to massively oversimplify to keep this short, but by way of a sort of a potted history, for a long time, discovery of scholarly content often meant the library catalogue, subject indexes, then came publisher platforms, Google Scholar, of course, and broad web search as well. Now we have open access, we have preprint servers, institutional repositories, and increasingly AI. So arguably, researchers and everyone else who reads our content have more pathways to content than ever before. And this is a really good thing in many ways, right? So it creates opportunities to lower barriers, to accelerate discovery, and ultimately to accelerate research as well. But it also risks fragmenting discovery. It raises questions about quality and trust, and potentially fundamentally changes the value proposition for publishers and librarians. So I'm really excited to discuss these issues with our panel today. I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Nisha Doshi, Head of Digital Publishing at Cambridge University Press. And then we have Blessing Mawere, who is Program Manager for Country Connections at Research for Life. We have Magali Taylor, who is Product Manager at Cengage and Chair of the ALPSP Content Discovery Special Interest Group, which I recommend you join if you're not already. We have John Campbell, who's Product Strategy Director for Academic at Oxford University Press. And we have George McGregor, who is Assistant Director for Digital Libraries at the University of Glasgow. So to kick off, a question for all of you. From your individual perspectives, how are researchers and other readers finding content today, and how is that changing? So let's start with George.
Well, thank you. Obviously, I'm giving the sort of academic library perspective, but actually you gave quite a good introduction there, Nisha, because actually there's just a huge diversity of discovery routes. I think that was always the case in academic libraries, but certainly the main channels are the library discovery layer, generic web search, Google Scholar. You've got your indexing and abstracted service. I suppose one of the sort of major developments are more open tools like OpenAlex and so on, but of course social media still plays a role, as we heard at a session earlier this morning. So we can really make assumptions about how academic users are going to locate content. I might say a little bit more about that later, but I guess the major change, and it's with grinding predictability that I have to say the words artificial intelligence or generative AI is obviously now starting to make an impact on how users are discovering content, and that means an increase in recommendation engines or Gen AI search assistants, which sort of disrupt what we kind of normally associate with an information seeking strategy. So rather than users having a conscious information seeking strategy, that's been disrupted by potentially algorithmically selected resources, which kicks up a whole load of potential issues, which we might come to later. Having said that, there are a lot of researchers in our institution that are using experimental AI discovery tools. It seems like almost every week there's a new one being launched. I don't know how sustainable they are or financially tenable they are, but obvious ones are Research Rabbit, which have LLM processed literature that generates visualizations of connections between literature and so on that users can traverse and so on. But that's just one of many different examples. But it's clear that researchers are sort of dipping their toe into this, but the jury's still out on how successful they are.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. And over to John for your perspective from a publisher.
Thank you. Well, it's a very rapid transition, and I think everybody in all the conferences we've been going to in the last couple of years, AI is absolutely here and normal, and it's business as usual, and the impacts of it are very significant, and they're quite very significant for our investment as well. And I think one of the main things to call out is that access to content has always been through whatever has been the most convenient gateway for a researcher, and any good publisher is playing in all those spaces. And AI is changing the balance of that. But the big challenge that we have at the moment is having the understanding with the users of our content, just how well they understand what their new research tools are telling them and what sources they've been using. And our last research on sort of user behavior and librarian sort of feedback there was about 40% of users are using generative tools regularly, and certainly for discovery specifically. And there's quite an assumption from those users that when they're getting a response from the research tools, particularly when they're within their institution, that they're getting responses that have been drawn from the premium content that library subscribes to. And in almost every case, they're not. And the surprise there is always, to me, surprising, because a lot is being relied upon very quickly. So actually the responsibility for the publisher is not sort of constantly fighting that. It's about understanding how to be in those new spaces that are commercially sensible, that are, for us particularly, and other similar not-for-profit publishers, pushing the dissemination story while still being sustainable. And but understanding the whole value exchange of how a publisher works with web users and AI users now is just fundamentally shifted. The Google deal of crawling for referrals is falling apart. The amount of traffic that comes from generative tools that's effectively abusive and blocked has gone off the scale. It's more stable now, but actually the sustainable ecosystems and our responses to this are a big part of our planning now. So really it's about a fundamental shaking of the snow globe, but it is the new normal.
Yeah, thanks, John. Magali can give us another publisher perspective as well. Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. So to the question of how researchified content, the first thing that comes to my mind is actually the mechanics behind this information retrieval for the discovery journey. So let's take a step back and thinking, the first thing is the topic is about the integration and interoperability that is hugely related to the quality of metadata, or actually the existence of that metadata. So we have here from John and George that the industry is always very active, bubbling with new research portals and tools to enhance the discovery experience and journey. We can be discovery services, can be the data repositories, search engines, citation databases, etc. But these tools, they provide actually the first interaction between the end users and the content through this little line that you can see that contain that metadata. They actually will, bring users to publisher platforms and to the content per se. The integrity, the authority of that little piece of metadata is essential. But the truth is that the interaction between those tools and the publisher's metadata or content is through these metadata feeds or content APIs or whatever search results technology is being connected. However, all the discovery tools, all the search portals, they have their own system requirements that make them select and enhance, transform the metadata they receive to fit their own systems. And then they start the first disconnection between the content source, so publishers, our content, and what the end user will see. So that's enough that our content is misunderstood or tagged wrongly to make this content completely not discoverable. So it will not be. So these rules of integration or the interoperability, they are not necessarily shared proactively with publishers. It is an issue that has been in the industry for a very long time. And AI tools will probably suffer of the same problem. So we are moving along to something new with existing issues that has been with us for many years. So the second topic that brings me this question is as well the concept of discoverability. I have on my job a lot of debates with discovery tools vendors say what discoverability is. But the reality is that librarians in general and publishers too, they know and they consider that at least 30% of their content is not discoverable. This could be based on the different content types. Now with electronic resources, it's so different experience between trying to find a journal article, that a piece of primary sources or a multimedia piece. is because all discovery services, well, all these search engines, they are evolving different. It has been evolving different degrees, the capabilities to manage different content types. That as well is an existing issue, and it has been with us for many years.
Absolutely, and finally, Blessing.
Yeah, I'm going to talk today from a perspective of the user from the low to medium income countries, because I'm here representing Research for Life. And Research for Life is a public-private partnership of about 145 publishers across the world, 5 UN agencies, and about 10 academic institutions, leading academic institutions, mostly across Europe and the US. And we're working in 124 countries. And we work much more closer to the users in these regions. And I know that George and John talked about the new advances in technology and AI and so forth. But for our users, really, there's still the issues of access. So one of the, why I talk specifically for my organization, Research for Life, is because we provide that access. We provide access to the content that most publishers, maybe in this room, provide to us as partners, and make sure that there's no barrier to that access. And the users, because of the issue of access and also this issue of trust, come to us through Research for Life. So we're working much closer now in the countries with the librarians, with the institutional management, with the researchers and so forth. And what Research for Life has done, it has started a program which has been running for about 5 or 6 years now, called Research for Life Country Connectors, where we go into the countries, we partner with the institutions, we work with the users to really understand what are their needs, what are their challenges, we build their capacities, we train them on the products, we train them on the databases and the products that the publishers are actually providing them, because there is no understanding of how to access and how to discover what is available. So we're working and holding their hands right in the countries as well. So the issue of AI, for us, AI literacy is still very limited, and access to paid AI services is quite low, because there are no resources for most of the institutions. And the institutions that have the resources to subscribe, and for the institutions are grappling with issues of policy. How do they integrate AI into their own policies? So one of the things that is actually removing a barrier to access as well within Research for Life itself is the introduction of the single sign-on as a new functionality for Research for Life to enable seamless access for the users in the institutions. And we're getting a lot of positive feedback from the librarians and from the users as well, that this is enabling them to access. So where we are now is to intensify our efforts to really do a lot of capacity building, and a lot of the users also to just help them to determine, you know, what is the right resource for their research and for their work, and how can they work with us. So the Country Connectors is making strides, and what we do is we incubate about 14 or 15 countries at a time, intensify, and then we expand to the rest of the 124 countries.
So fantastic, great to hear about that, thank you. And I'd like to dig a bit deeper into that issue of access and barriers to access that you were just talking about. So another question for the panel. Thinking about the impact of open access and repositories specifically on content discovery, what implications does that have for publishers, for librarians, for other members of our community? So again, start with George, if that's okay.
Well, for libraries, obviously, open access and repositories has been terrific, because it's been about the democratization of scholarly content. So there's an equity aspect to this, and obviously that's facilitated much more rapid publication of research. And I suppose the recent COVID pandemic is a really good example of how repository infrastructure was brought to bear on solving a global humanitarian crisis. We would not know what we know about COVID had it not been for the rapid sharing of manuscripts and reports and pre-printing that was possible during that time. Unfortunately for you guys, that does mean that I think it's piled on the pressure even more about rapid turnaround times with peer review and so on, and we did hear a bit about that at this morning's session. But that whole equity democratization thing, I think, is really critically important for citizen science, and so that is a whole other category of discovery that we tend not to think about. But you know, open access and repositories make that kind of possible, and citizen scientists, they don't need to understand the vagaries of repositories and what they are. You know, they can be searching the Cambridge University website, and you know, if they hit a paywall, they can use tools like the unpaywall plugin to, you know, to perform that content negotiation for them, put them in touch with an open copy that they can get access to. So I think that is really important, and it's an important impact that it's having in the repository landscape. But I think the most important point I think is important to make is that repositories now have graduated to become essential nodes in the scholarly communications landscape. It used to be, and I was joking with someone yesterday that I have been applying the oil of Olay rigorously. So, but I have been around for quite a long time. And when repositories were really first emerging, there was quite an adversarial positioning between publishers and repositories. But actually now, 25 years on, perhaps even more than that, they're actually in a codependent relationship, because much of the content that's now published in traditional scholarly publications link out to important data sets or software through persistent identifiers, perhaps even reference preprints and accepted author manuscripts. And in fact, that's also an important channel for discovery. So if you work in gravitational waves research in physics, you know, the data sets you're working with are absolutely humongous, and from those data sets you can probably generate 30, maybe 40 papers. And so actually the data set becomes the route to discovering the papers. So it's almost like turning upside down the way that academic users are finding the content. And that's definitely the case through software. You know, people often find software to address a particular problem, and they then read the associated research publication after that. So I think citizen science and that idea that we're in a codependent relationship now, that is not me personally, just to be clear here.
Yeah, I agree, and I agree with that point about publishers and repositories seeing ourselves more in partnership as well. Things like the JISC publications router in Deep Green, where publishers are proactively depositing content into repositories and supporting them rather than sort of seeing them in tension. So
exactly,
yeah, I agree.
Exactly that.
Blessing and Magali, shall we go with Blessing first?
Oh, yeah. Yes, so the growth of open access, I think, is an open access resources, not just talking about institutional repositories. It's been a big game changer for most of the regions that I work in, and where I live and work as well. Really thinking about librarians, for example, and information professionals, the open access and repositories offer new opportunities to democratize information access, streamline collection management opportunities, and really promote local content dissemination. They also bring in challenges around management of metadata, making sure that there's discoverability and integrate disparities repositories have in cohesive discovery ecosystems. One thing that we are really pushing in the work that I'm doing is to make sure that stakeholders like policymakers, the different local publishers as well, and funders recognize the importance of investing in open access infrastructure, because without that, then we can't really talk about you know, all of this positive that we're talking about, supporting the work that we're doing in capacity building. But really what is crucial is to really maximize the benefits of open access for us and for the regions that we're working in. And I must say that the work that we're doing with some of the partners and stakeholders here around open access is also making traction. I know a lot of people don't understand open access within the context of Research for Life, but there's actually a lot that we're doing. We also have partners within the program that are enabling our authors to also publish and waive some of the APCs. So it's really good to see all of this happening as well for us. So it's a big game changer, but more is needed, and we want to just make sure that we have access, but also some of the few case studies that we're seeing or impacts that we're seeing is that within some regions, I'll speak, for example, in East Africa, we're seeing a lot of institutions coming together into making sure that their institutional repositories are connected. So there's a network of institutional repositories with the goal of making sure there's shared access to the research that they're doing, but also is creating platforms for them to work together. So we have that South-to-South collaboration where there's easier capacity building, this understanding of standards, and really just improving the way that local research is also included and made visible, not only in those countries and in those regions, but also at a global scale.
Thank you. And Magali?
Yeah, from my perspective, the repositories repositories are great. It's a place where faculty members can depot their work, they make them available, the community, research community can access it. But again, from more the discovery journey, the library discovery journey, it can be kind of a nightmare because there is nobody actually curating that metadata. They actually integrate the flows of the discovery, and that it's true. George was saying in our preps meetings that it's the preprints, published papers, and etc. But from a novice point of view, probably you've seen a lot of duplicates, and it's not easy really to manage. And that I want to highlight actually the amazing work that librarians do through information literacy to explain the difference, what the paper is here, what that means the paper is there. And without them really is, they try to untangle that mess, that confusion. From the open access perspective as well, we are not an open access publisher. We have open access content in our databases. But from my other experience outside Yale, I know that from open access perspective, there's a big push from authors, founders, publishers to disseminate that content as much as possible. So that content is pushed with their metadata. But again, as I said before, every single system has their own requirements. Every single thing that they got their own quality standards. So slowly those records are changed. It's something that is very challenging. Is that for any reason, any correction has to be cascaded from the top, from the publisher, for the first owner of that content. Through all the system, it's practically impossible. I always said something like, once it's out there, it's out of control. It's impossible to catch every single piece of metadata that has been sent. So that again, disrupts the flow of the discovery journey. And yeah, probably need to be a little bit more curated. And that's the thing with open access collections. For many years, probably has changed now with the changes of open access models and libraries being more involved. But I remember from the beginning, librarians are very good, because it's their responsibility to do it, but they are very good curating the metadata for the subscribed content, for their collections, and they invest a lot of time. But for open access collection, I heard more than once saying, no, we don't gonna spend time because it's free, so we don't gonna do it. And that means there's a gap, and there is kind of a lot of probably content that is not discoverable at the moment for that reason. But otherwise, yes, open access is great.
So we're all thinking about AI at the moment, so let's move on to that. So perhaps we can talk about what impact AI is having on content discovery beyond what you said in your initial speeches, and how you see that unfolding over the next few years as things are changing very rapidly. So let's start with John this time.
Yeah, thank you. So a lot of those views on the open access and repository side from our planning, I wanted to reflect a little bit in this answer, which is a lot of the challenges that Magali's been describing have been carried straight over into the kind of tools that users are increasingly starting to rely upon without knowing that they can't quite rely upon them yet. And the genesis of the large language models that we're increasingly relying upon have been typically not from a publisher's primary source. They've gone to wherever they can. On the book side, they've gone to places they really shouldn't have gone. But the net result of that is all that variation of where corrections were made, where they weren't, et cetera, et cetera. But there are many impacts from this shift in how discovery and consumption is working. But the main, one of the main ones that I'll call out is fundamentally it's an impact on impact. It's very hard to tell the story now, increasingly, of the impact that was quite relatively straightforward to tell in a sort of usage engagement story. As every publisher's services face this disintermediation and stress on traffic, and just the raw counter statistics that sit behind any commercial renewal of a service. And so being able to very quickly regroup to start to tell a much more multivariate story than we ever used to do, even with altmetric and other sort of secondary metrics and policy mentions and everything else. We have to have a different way of telling the story now. And I mentioned before that one of the main impacts on services has been that these tools are very traffic hungry and very abusive. So everybody blocked them. That lack of visibility now in generative responses in the valued citation is a big deal. Everyone needs to be letting in a controlled way the bots to be able to have that citation and visibility within generative responses now. I think the speed at which we do it is absolutely critical to the level of visibility we will have from here. These are quite low latency refresh cycles. So Oxford is letting in sort of controlled areas of bot traffic. You can intuit some difference between those that are clearly abusively extractive and those that are part of now legitimate research journeys that we have to meet. But the ability to tell the story from that is incredibly hard. Metrics aren't the same. The fractions of contribution from the core work into the generative response, there are no standard models. We've got a lot of experience on the B2B side where many of those are defined in a licensing space or starting to be, which will probably be quite significant for how the industry starts then to tell these attribution stories. But as an industry, this is a challenge. We are actually starting to see an increase in click-throughs from citations to increasingly more valued content as deals are made, particularly within our industry. And that's a really good thing. And that's also enabling us to tell a little bit of that story back to institutional librarians and purchasers who are looking at usage dropping in some cases for some grounded reference content by 50, 60% and going, well, why should we use that? And then you can actually start to show that the engagement with this data overall is increasing significantly, but our ability to tell it as a holistic story is not keeping up. So one of the sort of big practical things within sort of more of the technology side of how we're managing at OUP is that shift from SEO to generative optimization to GEO is very real, very fast, has to be engaged with very quickly. It will affect every part of how we operate. It's the forms of the content that best work now with the new types of crawlers and the kind of hooks that a generative agent will be looking for when they're looking to select you above somebody else. Some of that is going to be pressure back onto authors or sort of partnering conversations with authors about the form of the work that's best going to work in the future. I think there's a big part to be played there by the publisher, actually being able to manage the intermediary layers that will be faster moving than the fixed version of record formats that we all rely upon, but need to be no less legitimate in terms of they've still got that stamp from that publisher or that funder or author. The whole importance of the structured data that works best in that space, that's getting more complicated. The first sort of licensing deals we were doing where you were passing over content, the first thing that the licensee would do would be to strip out the XML. That's passing because, of course, we weren't just all sitting on our asses for 20 years. We were adding value to a lot of the enrichment we were doing. And I think particularly in law and areas of jurisdiction data, those can't be reconstituted by a summative tool. So it really is quite a sort of multivariate impact, but I think the main thing here is there are some glimmers of interesting trends of what might happen. So we're seeing where you have referrals coming in from a generative answer within Perplexity or within GPT-EDU, etc., that actually the bounce rates are lower. The time being spent with the content in some cases is starting to tick up in some. There may be a placebo effect there as I desperately look at these numbers, but I think it is real. And some of the trend that's being seen outside our industry is that a lot of the sort of the pre-work is being done as everyone's using the AI tool to understand, if we just put it in a non-industry sector, which type of plants pots do I need, etc. All that work has been done. By the time they've landed with you, they know what you want if you've correctly described and made visible what you have to offer. And I think that sort of exchange, that sort of value exchange, thinking about how Google starts to drop away in the old sense, is going to be very important for us to navigate.
I completely agree, and we're seeing very similar trends in our data at Cambridge as well. Over to Maggie. I'm conscious of time. We've got another question we all want to cover, so we might
Yeah,
be
so
as concise as we can manage to be.
as we can do. Again, we use AI. We have been using AI for a very long time, especially in our indexing processes. Outside Yale, we have seen AI being very successfully used for enhancing and supporting catalogers. For example, there is a project in the National Library of Belgium. The thing is, discovery services now, they want as well to start using AI, but what they're doing is adding features to create summaries of the content. And things that make me, it is more debatable really of this approach. Once they actually creating a barrier to the content, and two, I'm not sure about the impact for the students as well. So shouldn't be they learning to do some skills, get some skill in fact findings and critical thinking. So that is where we are in the discovery service sides. Something very interesting, maybe I encourage you to read it if you got time. It is the ODI, the Open Discovery Initiative of NISO. They have just published a white paper. They sent a survey around the publishers and libraries to understand, their views of AI. They bring back a white paper including some what they call hopes and concerns. They are gathering more than the US perspective. They got a lot of respondents from the US. It's interesting to see the hopes for that they have brought on the report is improving visibility, especially thinking about the long tail, about thinking that the user don't move along from the first page of results. How AI could help actually to bring most visibility to all the results, and how they can more accurate propose related content. About the concerns is about a lot is about lack of transparency, what the discovery services actually doing, how they're using the content, how they're using the metadata. Fabrication of content, we don't need AI to do content. We are publishers, we are in that business. And as well about copyright infringement and the environmental impact of the big data centers. So if you got time, if you're interested in seeing, it's a nice small read to do.
Absolutely, George. Thoughts on AI?
Yes. I think picking up on John's point about the aggressive crawling, so obviously I'm in the business of digital libraries and open repositories, and I want our services to be as open as possible to users, but that also means machines, because that opens up innovative research opportunities. But the trouble we are having as a sector, and it's not just the University of Glasgow that suffers this, is the sort of abusive crawling that we're experiencing from large language model software agents, to such an extent that it is tantamount to a denial of service attack. And so in the sector there's this tricky balancing act of trying to keep systems as open as possible and block abusive bots wherever possible. And there is a kind of coordinated response at the moment being devised so that the sector can respond to that more effectively. But I just wanted to make that point, because that ultimately degrades the discovery experience for human users, because while these bots are crawling our services, the services grind to a halt until eventually they do keel over and die before being resuscitated. I just wanted to say more about the impact of AI on content discovery, and John kind of hinted at this. And actually Magali as well, the way in which it's been implemented within a lot of discovery services is a bit bandwagon-esque. I think I've mentioned, and a bit cack-handed. It seems like it's being deployed in really quite inappropriate ways sometimes, and quite often, as Magali says, it's about summarizing text for users. And I can see in some instances that would be effective, but in most cases it's about kind of, as I mentioned earlier, serving the user an algorithmically selected set of literature, which could have problems for scholarship if you've got a machine intermediating in that process and a human isn't actually reviewing the sources that they're planning to use in their research and their writing. There are obviously concerns around the rigour of scholarship. Where I've seen it used most effectively is actually to mediate the search query process. So the big problem for users historically, if you go back in history to the late 70s, early 80s, Nicholas Belkin and his team researching information retrieval noted that most users suffer the anomalous state of knowledge. So this is where they struggle to think of a query, because generally they go to an information retrieval system to learn about something they don't know about. So how can they be expected to formulate queries? But here an AI assistant could be transformative, because it could translate really quite crude user queries into a syntax that a retrieval system can actually take advantage of. And really that's what I would like to see more of. I do worry about the conflation of generative AI responses as an information retrieval mechanism. There's already quite a growing body of evidence to show that it's really quite ineffective at doing that, and can miss a lot of literature. And I suppose added to all of that, the concerns around hallucinations and falsification of references and so on. But this idea of AI as an answer machine, but also having to review your sources and read your sources before you actually use them in your writing.
Yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, we've only got 5 minutes left in the session, so I wanted to end with what you think all of this means. So thinking about that image of the shaking the snow globe that John mentioned earlier, that there's a lot going on. What actions do we actually need to take as publishers, as librarians, as other members of our community, and maybe just sort of one quick take on that each, starting with John, if that's all right.
Okay, 1 minute. So it is about the collaboration on the new uses metrics, which will be telling the story of what we do as an industry. That's going to need to be also working now with the large technology companies, the way in which this is going to be credible in terms of sources in the large commercial horizontal tools or within a publisher specific need to be the same. The other thing is that, as well as the traffic drops, what we're starting to lose through the use of AI tools is that relationship with the user and the customer data that used to come with that, and the way in which we're fostering those research communities. And so implementing solutions like MCP, like agent to agent, this is a very important way to start to meet agent use properly, not hammer web services, start to have that data relationship, and also bring the user more quickly to the most focused responses.
Absolutely, thank you. And Magali?
Yeah, very briefly. I think discovery is one of these areas that requires the interaction between the three stakeholders: system vendors, publishers, and libraries. And AI has to be part of that. I think as publishers, we should partner with libraries to ask system vendors to be more transparent in how these AI features are being made, how the content is being used, how the metadata is being used. AI is a perfect tool, and it should be used, for example, to enhance metadata, to enhance the processes, not to obscure the access to the content.
Thank you. Blessing.
So I'll always speak for the user, and I really speak here to my partners, the publisher partners and those in the room, to really advocate for inclusive technological solutions that address barriers such as infrastructure, language, ethics, and ensure that it's equitable access for all user groups. And just to keep that in mind, even as we develop and advance, especially in this area, so that we continuously keep the gap smaller.
And finally, George.
I would just echo Blessing there on the infrastructure side, particularly from repositories. I mean, I am slightly concerned that, because repositories are generally operated by research libraries, and we normally think that research libraries are quite trustworthy spaces for managing digital objects, but that's not always the case. I think a lot of research libraries are carrying a lot of technical debt when it comes to their repositories. They haven't been maintaining them as well as they should, and that means that they've not been observing a lot of the standards that we need around metadata that Magali was talking about, and keeping our infrastructure fit and healthy for the generative AI age. So my message would be that research libraries need to refocus on those repositories.
Thank you very much. Do we have time for one question, Kate? Yeah? Sure. There is, yeah, it's coming.
So I'm Ross Mounts from Arcadia Fund, a charitable foundation. Could we talk about the Barcelona Declaration on open research information in the context of content discovery? Do you think that's had a much impact so far? There's certainly a push from funders and institutions to have more open metadata, which I think will feed through to a better kind of content discovery ecosystem. But I'm not seeing that quite reflected from the publisher side. I'd like to hear maybe responses from publishers towards the Barcelona Declaration.
Who wants to go with that?
Yeah, I don't have specifics to share on that other than the generalized principle, which is we're going to need as much of that type of open data to be effective as an industry. We have a couple of products that have been launched into the market trying to tell a broader funder story, which Oxford's been behind working with a couple of others, that's been trying to pull together what data is available, has made it available freely to be able to tell that story better. So while I won't respond to the specific there, I think the general, we're very open to that.
Yeah, from my perspective, I don't have the specifics about the Barcelona Declaration, but I can tell you a little bit about the open metadata. So metadata per se, there is no copyright on metadata. There is only copyright on the indexing terms that can be added to it. It's the only part of the metadata record that can be, copyright can be claimed. Open metadata has existed for at least many, many years. So I remember working in GSKB Plus, and we had CC0 license for our metadata. It hasn't had much impact, but it's true because if the metadata is good, it will has impact. If it's open, it has to be good. But if it's not good, it doesn't matter if it's open or not.
I would just really briefly add to that, that we're finding that the extent to which our metadata is open or not is indicating how useful some of the research integrity tools that we might want to use are in terms of using that metadata and telling us the story back about some of our content. So I think it's important for the publisher as well. I think we're out of time, yes. So before we go, I wanted to say that there will be a 25-minute coffee break after this, and the next session will be at 4 o'clock in Deansgate 1 and 2, that one. It's licensing content in the age of generative AI, obstacles, opportunities, and optimism. And finally, a big thank you to my panel. Thank you very much.